Welcome everyone to this webinar on measuring the business impacts of paid leave. I'm the moderator, Chris Liu. We have about 22 people on the line, so we're going to still have more probably jump on in addition to our panelists, but we are now on 105, so let's get started. As I said, I'm the moderator of today's webinar. My name is Chris Liu. I'm currently a senior strategy advisor at a company called FiscalNote, which is in Washington, D.C. Prior to this, I was the Deputy Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Let me first thank our two co-hosting organizations. Let's flip the slide. Great. The first one is the American Sustainable Business Council, which is an organization that focuses on largely environmental and labor policies, or as we often say, people, planet, profit. I know this well since I'm a board member of ASBC, and the association represents about 200,000 business leaders around the country. I know many of you are on here as ASBC members, and for that, we are very appreciative. ASBC has been involved in this effort in terms of high road workplaces and creating more sustainable working conditions in terms of higher wages and better benefits, and obviously paid leave is an important part of that. Next slide. The other co-host today is Panorama, which is an action tank located in Seattle. It works on a variety of issues, both domestic and internationally. But since 2016, since launching in 2016, an important part of Panorama's work has been about the changing U.S. workforce, and it has been leading an effort in terms of making the business case for paid family and medical leave policies. There's a great website that has a lot of resources, which is uspaidleave.com. With that, let us flip to the next slide and to do a quick overview of today's webinar. I'm going to ask Trisha at Panorama to talk about the work that they have been doing, in particular a data collection project, which is really exciting, that I think addresses some of the big gaps that we have in terms of understanding the benefits and opportunities around paid leave. And then we've got three wonderful panelists to talk about their experiences with this policy. And then we'll have an open discussion that I will be asking some questions of our panelists, and then we'll be opening up the questions from the audience. You don't have to wait to submit your questions until the end. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, there's a question and answer box. Just click on that and you can submit your questions, and we will get those queued up from the audience. The goal is to wrap this up in about 45 minutes to an hour, but we will certainly have everyone out of here by 2 o'clock, so we'll do this as quickly and crisply as possible. So with that, let me turn it over to Trisha to talk a little bit more about Panorama and their paid leave project.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm Trisha Comsti, and I'm a program officer at Panorama, and I lead Panorama's work on paid family and medical leave, which, as Chris mentioned, is an important area of work for our organization. Panorama has been working on paid leave since we launched in 2016, and there has been a lot of work in this time by others to look at the benefits of paid leave from an employee perspective, a public health perspective, and also a lot of people focusing recently on the changes in government policy related to paid leave. The unique space that Panorama has been aiming to fill is to look at paid leave from an employer perspective. And you'll see here, as I change the slide, that in the past, Panorama has undertaken quite a few different research projects on paid leave, and this has included creating a paid leave playbook that serves as a guide for employers that are looking to either implement a new paid leave policy or expand the paid leave policy that they have. And what Panorama has found through this work is that, yes, businesses want to offer benefits, including paid leave, that improve the lives of their employees, but companies also have to consider how offering a paid leave policy will impact their business. So what we found is that companies want to know the answers to questions like, what is the cost of a paid leave policy? What can my company expect to see as a result of adopting a paid leave policy? Is it increased productivity? Is it improved or easier talent recruitment? What kind of financial return can I expect is also a question that we get a lot. So with these kinds of questions in mind, last year, Panorama developed this framework for thinking about how the drivers behind paid leave policies work together with the investments that companies make and how that can turn into positive returns for a business. So the framework you see here was developed with input from the Human Capital Management Institute, or HCMI, and we have a representative from HCMI joining us today as part of our panel. And it also comes from a lot of in-depth conversations we've had with businesses about what either hinders or motivates them to offer paid leave to their employees. So through these conversations, a common theme emerged that Chris, I think, alluded to, that companies want data to inform their decisions on paid leave. And this includes data on the cost of paid leave, what the financial returns are, the impact on their workforce, and information about what others in their industry are doing. And really, this is data that really hasn't been, I think, researched by any other organization, or really isn't readily available, at least publicly. So considering what we heard from companies about the importance of data, Panorama's current work is a study to measure the return on investment, or ROI, of paid leave programs, and provide the kind of data that companies need to make informed decisions about paid leave. So HCMI, here again, is our data partner on this work. They're doing the data analysis. And our current project is looking at over 40 companies across finance, information, and manufacturing industries. And while this work is still in progress, I invite all of you listening here to visit uspaidleave.org later this summer to view the findings from this work. So that's a quick overview of what Panorama is doing in this space. And for today, we are really pleased to have with us on this webinar representatives from Nestlé, South Mountain Company, and HCMI to talk about their company's approaches to paid leave, how data can be used to make decisions around paid leave, and how data might inform the broader policy conversations that are happening today. So with that, I will pass the mic back over to Chris to introduce our panelists.
Great. Thank you, Trisha. And let me also apologize. It's uspaidleave.org, not .com, which I should have known.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is actually ask each of the speakers to talk for about a minute on their role at their company, what their company does, and what their paid leave policies are. So with that, let me first start with Nicole Collier, who I have worked with in many, many contexts. She's Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Nestlé. Let me turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for having me and having me represent Nestlé. I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Nestlé. I'm based in our newly relocated headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. We're right in Roslyn. Our headquarters used to be in Glendale, California. I work I'm one of the external facing people for the company, representing our policy agenda, as well as working with stakeholders and coalitions on behalf of our interests, whether that be related to food and nutrition, as we are a nutrition company, or climate, environment related policy, which is another big pillar of ours, or the work that we're doing in our communities. Nestlé is the world's largest food and beverage company. We are based in Vevey, Switzerland, but have almost 50,000 employees in the U.S., so much larger than a lot of people recognize, and make everything from pizzas to frozen meals to Gerber products to coffee. So a wide array of products. We expanded our parental leave policy in 2016 to include 14 paid weeks and 12 unpaid weeks, a total of 26 weeks, with lots of benefits attached to that, related to lactation consulting, as we're a big proponent of breastfeeding, and return phase work, which I can talk a little bit about later. We have a large hourly workforce, and also that benefit applies to our hourly workforce as well as our salaries. So it's a little snapshot. We'll get more into it as we go further.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Let's turn it over to Siobhan Mullin with South Mountain Company. She's one of the co-owners of the company, and we can flip that slide. There you go, Siobhan.
Thanks, Chris, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about paid leave. I work for South Mountain Company. We are an integrated architecture, engineering, building and renewable energy firm. We're located in the town of West Tisbury on the island of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. That's kind of off the coast there of Cape Cod for those who wouldn't be familiar with us. As a company, we are mission-driven, certified B Corp. We're a worker-owned cooperative and a triple bottom line company. What you mentioned earlier on then, people, planet and profit are our drivers for measures that we try to quantify at the end of the year. We currently have a staff of 36, which includes 5 architects, 2 engineers, 2 interior designers, and a team of carpenters, cabinet makers, solar installers, all rolled into a multidisciplinary team. I've been working with South Mountain for 16 years. My current position is Director of Finance and Human Resources, as well as being a co-owner. A large part of my role deals with HR and developing policies for our employees. For many years, we have always had a generous paid leave policy in line with our guiding principles of creating long-term, stable, meaningful jobs with living wages for our employees. And we feel strongly about supporting our families in every way possible. In the last 6 months, we have spent considerable time reworking our paid leave policies to ensure compliance with new Massachusetts laws for family and medical leave, as well as to enhance our policies. So currently we have a variety of paid time off policies to include sick and personal time off, paid holidays, a vacation policy. Then we have a parental leave policy and medical leave and family leave. So there's a lot of different options for our employees to tap into for a variety of reasons that we'll talk more about throughout the webinar.
Great, thank you, Siobhan. Let us turn then to Stephen Weltz. Stephen is with Human Capital Management Institute, HCMI. He is a workforce analytics manager, and as Trisha said, HCMI is working with Panorama in terms of analyzing the data for this project. Stephen?
Thank you, Chris. And hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Yeah, my name is Stephen Weltz, Workforce Analytics Manager. Been with HCMI for about 5 years. So I'm going to be coming from a slightly different perspective from my colleagues. I will be talking a little bit less about my company's policies specifically, because I'm coming from the perspective of consulting, where we've worked with, and more specifically, workforce analytics consulting. We've worked with a large number of companies basically analyzing how their way of managing or supporting their employees, the way that they've planned out their workforce, impacts their overall business and financial results. Our mission, essentially, as you can see here, is basically to show or to help show how people add value to the business and are not simply a cost to be minimized, which you often see a little bit of a dichotomy in companies where they'll say on one hand, well, our people are our most valuable asset, but then when it comes to, sometimes, in some cases, when it comes to paying for specific benefits policies or training programs, engagement programs, basically any way of supporting their employees, they start to balk at it as a cost. And what we want to show is that, and what we've often found, is that when you support your employees, it actually is a benefit all around, both for the employees and for yourselves as well. So I'll be coming at this from a perspective of talking about some of the clients that we've worked with, not naming them specifically, keeping it anonymous, but talking about some of the findings that we've seen there, as well as the paid leave project that we've been working on in concert with Panorama. So excited to be here talking with you all today.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, let's move to the question and answer portion of this. There are obviously, as I mentioned, 2 different ways to ask questions. Where you can click on the little Q&A box, which is basically at the center bottom, or you can also email. You can also email if you would like as well. Hey, Trisha, we should, I think we're seeing your emails at the moment.
Sorry about that.
You're in present mode, just remember. Well, let me first start with Nicole and Siobhan talking about your company's experiences with your paid leave policies. Let me ask you first about if you have data in terms of the take-up rate. for that benefit, and then what you have seen in terms of benefits. And I'll just prod you a little bit because we often hear anecdotally about it. It's easier to recruit people to the company. It's also it also helps in terms of retention. So let me start with you, Nicole, and you could take any part of that question that you want.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the positive impacts to the business, I mean, as a consumer goods company, when we usually measure business impact, we're talking about goods sold, right? But this is a little bit different. It's a little bit more complex, and people that are struggling with figuring out ROI and things like that, you have to dig a little deeper. I believe, and more importantly, our CEO believes that our people and our culture is the most critical component to our success in the marketplace. And he has embedded that throughout. I mean, he says it every time we hear him speak, and it's very clear that we've invested a lot in culture at our company. With that in mind, building a culture of support and understanding and flexibility in an environment that welcomes input is what we have been striving to do. And our parent support policy is really a big example of that. It was announced, like I said, January 1st, 2016 was when it was implemented. So we're still somewhat early days in the expansion of that. Is it helping us sell more DiGiorno pizzas? I'm not sure, but what we hear all the time is that from our insights is that consumers want to feel good about the goods that they purchase and the companies that produce those products. And I think this definitely puts us in a better place than companies that don't have a paid leave policy. And that's one of the reasons why we're so open about talking about it, but also because we do believe it's better for our society, being a global company with European roots. It's almost unheard of for my global colleagues. They don't even know why we're talking about it all the time. They're like, why is this a thing? Because nowhere else in the world really is the situation as it is in the U.S., where we don't have a policy, a federal national policy for paid leave for parents. And this is just we think we're contributing to that. Reputationally, it's been I think it's really good for us to be categorized with world-class employers, and I think this is becoming what makes you a world-class employer in the U.S. And I think the tech companies for that, and a lot of small and medium-sized companies that have really paved the way, and I think it's good to be a bigger company. And for those of you on the call that are in the Washington area, you may have heard that Amazon is coming to Arlington, which is where we sit, and we have to be competitive. We have to have a competitive array of benefits to offer to employees. We're going to be probably competing against each other a bit over the next few years for good talent. And that's really what ultimately leads to the success for us right now. So for us, I think what you kind of alluded to, Chris, in the question, it's certainly one of the biggest operational expenses to recruit, hire, onboard, and train a new candidate. And anything that we can do to retain the good talent that we have, we are doing that. This is a big part of that toolbox for us.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Siobhan, would love to hear about your experiences in terms of if you have, and I'm guessing with a company of 36 employees, you have a better perspective of what the take-up rate is on parental or family leave and what you found in terms of affecting recruitment or retention.
Certainly, yes. We're a small company, certainly not on the scale of Nestlé by any stretch of the imagination, but we have a high take-up rate on all of our paid leave policies because it's something that, particularly in where we're living and with our employees here, it's something that they really, really do value. Over the years, we have chosen to provide a work environment that supports a healthy work-life balance, and it's been our focus. You had mentioned just the recruiting, we have definitely found that paid leave is something that's top tier with current new hires that we've been dealing with over the most recent years rather than in the past. We have a smaller pool to draw from because we live on this island, and so when we are hiring, having these significant paid leave policies gives us a differentiator between us and our competitors when it comes to hiring. Having the family-friendly policies has also allowed us to offer employment that can meet a diverse set of needs for a variety of people during various stages of life. We have found that for younger workers coming in, it's not as important to them because they don't have a family. Maybe it's just a single individual, and when we're trying to tout the benefits of these, they're a tad skeptical. But then the vacation policy is the one that they are more in tune with. But then when it comes to family leave and another stage of life, having the flexibility is really what people seem to value. As much as having paid time off, having the flexibility when you're coming back into the workforce, perhaps after having a family or during family life, we find that's one of the benefits that is most valuable to people. And then when people are at the other end of the spectrum, we have some more senior employees when they're starting to reach retirement age. Reduced hours, flexibility are equally important to them. It allows us the opportunity to be able to continue to draw on their wisdom and expertise as they transition out. Currently in our staff right now, we have a variety of people who work on different schedules. We have people who work full-time, three-quarter time and part-time as their roles allow. Another part of the flexibility that we feel is important is a lot of our staff are availing of opportunities to work from home as technology have evolved. In terms of take up, particularly if we're particularly talking about parental leave here and family leave, we have full utilization of those policies if an individual is taking parental leave. In Massachusetts here, we have some new laws that have come into place in the last couple of years, and we're actually going to have employer participation in July in paying for tax supplement as well as an employee contribution, and that's going to start in October. So there's a lot of things shifting in Massachusetts in this realm that we're trying to stay ahead of. For many years, we have found that we've actually been ahead of the game in terms of offering paid leave. We've always had a paid leave policy, but we've enhanced that now over the last 2 years to offer 8 weeks full pay and then 12 weeks of family leave that can bring the benefit up to like 20 weeks. So for a company our size, it's particularly unusual to have such a comprehensive paid time off policy, but we just know that the bottom line is that it's good for our business. We attract employees and we can retain them, and we're very fortunate that we have a low turnover rate. For a company our size, again, our average length of employment is currently about 15 years. We've had 2 recent retirees who've worked with the company, for 30 and 40 years. So for us, particularly in a small region, that value of retention is definitely a big one.
Siobhan, I just want to ask you a follow-up question on this. I mean, obviously, your company is of a significantly different size than Nestlé. And that's not to say that there are not disruptions within a business unit at a large company if somebody takes an extended period of leave. How have you and your company adjusted when 1 out of your 36 employees is gone for 20 weeks at a time?
Right. Good question, and I'm actually a great example because during my 16 years at South Mountain, I've had 3 children, and during that time, really, we don't have a lot of duplication of roles, particularly in operations. In the field, we have other employees that have duplicate roles that can kind of fill in. But when you have a gap, it's challenging. There's no question. But because we have offered kind of flexible work schedules and we have employees that are responsible and have kind of and at being a worker-owned cooperative, we kind of feel like we have another level of commitment to the company. So we've either shared duties when somebody has left, done some cross-training where we've kind of focused on that quite a little bit in the last couple of years, kind of building our capacity so that we don't have kind of significant gaps if somebody has to take significant leave off. What ended up happening with myself is when I took off to have my children, I kind of, made sure that everyone can just get as much as they can get done before they have to leave. And then technology has really helped in the past keeping in touch. And then just having some temporary staff come in to do relief as needed. But we have found, typically maybe for the first 8 weeks, we can cope. Most of us can kind of absorb some of the work that other people might not be able to do during that short space of time. And then the flexibility to come in and maybe work a half day and then go home has been really the approach that most people have used in using up the remainder of their leave. They may not work a full week coming back, or even a full day coming back for a number of weeks, stretching out to maybe even 3 months. And that's really how we've been able to manage with people taking off extended leave.
That's perfect. Go ahead.
Can I just add a little to that from Nestlé's perspective? Because we are much larger, but it is disruptive, and particularly I think our factory population had trouble with it. People are doing one function, that's their expertise, and when you remove them from the line or from other parts of the factory, it can be very disruptive to figure out how to deal with that for an extended period of time. We've utilized, in some cases, contractors. We've reshifted work roles, but it's taken some cultural work in that particular part of our business as well, about what this is and what this means and who is eligible for it. But I think overall it's been a really good journey. I think even, my team, which is somewhat small, has a colleague out on leave right now, and we've all just, you manage and you deal with it. And it's, I think everyone feels like, because we are a company, particularly with the Gerber brand, which is a baby food and formula brand, that we have to embrace what it is to be a parent, and all the things that you need as you're giving birth or adding to your family in different ways. And I think most of our employees are happy to help fill in where they can, but it can be a challenge, and I won't say that it was smooth sailing everywhere in the company around that. It's still part of our journey, I think.
Great, thank you for that perspective, Nicole. Stephen, let me ask you, as somebody who works with a number of companies, in terms of the favorable workforce outcomes, what have you seen as well?
I really appreciate what my colleagues have kind of already said about the retention piece. I think that was probably the first one I was going to go to as far as what we've seen, and especially the point about how costly replacing employees can be. I'll add on to that when you think about keeping high-value employees through things like better benefits and paid leave, what companies often get stuck in the paradigm of thinking is they think, well, if somebody leaves, we're not paying them, so we spend less money, and overall it's a benefit. But what they don't understand is often they still need to get the work done. They still need to produce, and they're going to end up needing to replace that person. And that not only are they going to have to pay any of the recruiting costs, any of the costs of the initial hire, the cost of the severance of the old employee, but they also often end up paying a higher average compensation, in that they have to pay whatever the market rate versus what we say at HCMI is usually it's cheaper to build talent than to just straight up buy talent, especially at higher levels of the workforce. So when they are forced for especially higher level positions or professional positions to replace somebody who's, I don't know, level 3, level 4, whatever that means for your company, from the external market, they're paying market rate versus somebody who was built up from level 1, which is usually a cheaper overall cost. So retention is a major one. In reducing turnover and reducing the costs from that perspective is a huge value. Look at some of the other types of programs we've looked at, because we looked at a number of different types of programs and benefits. We've seen benefits all across what we call the talent management lifecycle, everything from recruiting through employee mobility, which is what we refer to as transfers and promotions, to better leadership, improved engagement, better overall retention of high-performing employees. Basically, basically companies that support their employees see the benefits in these different aspects of the talent management lifecycle. For example, we have seen that market equitable pay leads to reduced turnover. We've seen flexible work schedules lead to better retention and engagement. And we've seen companies that provide things like, say, wellness programs or paid leave programs have fewer days lost to illness, lower attrition, and finally, the one that's focused on as far as the paid leave study that we're doing, improve productivity. And when we say productivity, I'm speaking from the broad-based financial perspective of improved overall company production versus employee costs. So across the wide variety of programs that we've looked at, I can't think I can remember the last time we've looked at a employee beneficial program where we haven't been able to see some kind of benefit that ultimately came down to an improvement in the bottom line as well, or improvement in financial results. Usually the costs are the focus, but then when you consider all these other improvements in the areas for employees, it actually ends up being a net benefit for both.
Well, Stephen, those are great points, and I think it's a good way to tee off the next set of questions I have for Nicole and Siobhan. It sounds like from both your company's perspective, this decision to provide paid leave, paid family leave, was because of a mission. So that there is data out there. Did any of that data play into play a factor here as to in terms of what this would do for retention, or any kind of measurements of productivity, or ease of recruitment, or was it simply based on we think this is the right thing to do? Nicole, let me start with you.
So going into the decision to expand, we didn't really have, I don't know that we'd done a lot of forecasting data or looking at, how this would impact recruitment. I do know we benchmarked other companies that either were in our industry or looked like us in terms of scale and size. We definitely looked at what, it costs, and there's not very much ROI. That's what all of this is about. There's not a lot of data out there, but what we could gather, we did. But then I think ultimately it really was that we globally, and this was a global policy, so this is in place for all of Nestlé employees, the 300,000 employees around the world, and most benefit types of things like this would be global. So I think it was much more that there's actually, when you look at the world, we were very much disadvantaged from our colleagues that live other places. And there was a little bit of an equity thing that they were looking at. And it was much more about actually the value statement, I think, around what we say and what we do here for our people. It's less about ROI, although as we expanded it, there definitely seemed to be a gap and a need for companies like us to be sharing what this experience was and what benefits we've seen from it. So we did that afterwards. But
Siobhan?
Right. I think from early on, paid sick leave and maternity leave were kind of seen as valuable benefits here at South Mountain, and over time we've definitely enhanced them, and maternity leave has become parental leave. When these policies were implemented, I wasn't here, but they were really mission driven and value driven as to why we should have them. The environment here is definitely one that we want to take care of each other, and as a worker-owned company, creating policy is something that all owners have a part in. So it wasn't management creating this policy, it was our board, which is made up of our owners. So these were the values that meant something to them way back when policies were being written. And so I think that they weren't really looking at data at that point, but definitely considering it from that perspective. But then as things evolved, and when I joined the company, there was another kind of wave of hires that happened about 15 years ago. And at that time, vacation time tended to come up to the forefront. Paid vacation time wasn't seen as important. And many years, employees were given the option of choosing a raise over receiving some form of paid vacation. And then what happened was people started to think that having some paid time off in the form of vacation was something that it was important to us. So we looked at some other policies that other companies had, and we settled on a way of gradually implementing a paid vacation policy, something that wouldn't have a detrimental impact financially And by just implementing it all in one go, it was kind of graduated in over a couple of years, and then it just became part of people's packages once they were new hires. And we do still, now we track how much all of these benefits cost our companies. These benefits and their value are outlined each year to our employees in their compensation summary. That's something that we've started to do in the last couple of years. Every year we give our employees a compensation summary, and it's a line-by-line item of their wages and their benefits, and each of the paid time off benefits that they have to utilize during the year and the dollar value associated with them. And they get that once a year when we've completed our annual evaluations. The value of these benefits we also factor in when we're preparing compensation packages for new hires, and we present them to our prospective employees so that they understand the monetary value as well as the personal value to themselves when we're trying to hire. So that's kind of where we focus on the data, is making sure that people understand the value of these benefits. Everyone has their own take on what the personal value is to them on having time away, but in another way of being transparent in our company, being able to show them the monetary value, we find is a good one too.
Siobhan, can I follow up on that? That's sort of interesting. So you provide employees at the end of the year with the value of their benefits. So is it the value of the paid leave I have actually taken, or just kind of the mere fact that I have paid leave available to me presumably is a benefit in some way? How do you quantify that?
The easy answer to that one is that whatever benefits paid, particularly paid time off, that our employees have, I would say we have 100% participation in them. So there isn't too much left. You know, so say if somebody had 4 weeks off, we will pay that 4 weeks off. We have there is an ability to roll some over into the next year, but we see that that is part of your package. It's money you are owed, and so you will get that. So if somebody can take that in wage if they don't take the time off, or they can take the time off and it'll be paid in their absence. So yes, everybody does get a line by line. So they will see the value of their 7 sick and personal days. They will see the value of their up to 5 weeks of vacation time. They will see the value of their 10 bank holidays that they take off. And then we have an expectations of hours of work that people have to do to attain all these benefits. And then that's part of their wage compensation that they see overall. That's the money they're earning for the work that they're doing. But we also show them the money that they will earn for the time that they take off.
That's interesting. Okay, that's helpful. Let me open it up to the questions from people listening on or watching it on the webinar. We've got a couple of questions already submitted, so I will ask them of the panelists, but feel free to submit other ones. As I said, you can either email them at paid leave, the paid leave at Panorama email, or you can also submit them at the bottom, and we'll queue up as many as we can. I'm just going to sort of quickly summarize the questions and try to give them to one of the panelists. Stephen, let me ask you this question that's been submitted about measuring the cost of turnover. I have seen in the press something like to replace an employee, it could cost upwards of 12 months of their salary when you consider not only recruitment, but the time lag and getting someone up to speed. What have you seen in the literature in terms of measuring the cost of turnover? And then the other part of the question that one of our participants has asked is to quantify the productivity of employees. Do you have any insights into either of those?
Yes, I do. Why don't I start with the second one, because it's a good framework for thinking about everything else from an analytics perspective. So as far as what we mean by productivity is a difficult question for any company because it depends a lot on different factors. So if you're thinking about it from an operational perspective, it's going to depend a lot on what kind of operational metrics you care about. However, the perspective that we at HCMI take, at least for the company level and even sometimes specific division level analyses, is that when you're thinking about financial based productivity, you're ultimately thinking about the amount of output you're producing versus the amount of input that you're putting in. Basically, how much you're paying and how much you're getting. And from a workforce productivity perspective, that means how much you're getting for example, how much you're getting for every dollar you spend on the workforce. Every time you spend $1 on the workforce, what's the overall ROI in terms of revenue or profit that you're getting? Now, how that applies to benefits and taking a look at this in the context of your overall company, I think one insight that is important to keep in mind, and something that's going to become more important as companies consider things like paid leave, is one, from a retention perspective, this is going to become more as more companies adopt this and get more involved and more generous in the paid leave and the overall benefits they offer. This is going to be no longer an option. This is going to become a requirement in order to be able to compete in the war for talent. I think as somebody's already mentioned how they're going to be near other very large companies and need to be ready to offer a comparable benefits package. The other thing is that when you're considering the overall productivity of your employees and you're thinking about this, companies right now often only think in terms of costs. But the problem is, if you are a company that's in the positive, in other words, you're generating more than you're paying, your revenue is higher than your costs. If you take a look at trying to increase output by 10% versus trying to reduce costs by 10%, you're going to actually get a higher impact on your bottom line by increasing that output or by supporting your employees more than just by continuously cutting costs. In fact, if you continuously cut costs, eventually you're going to get to the point where you are not able to produce that output at all. Now, how that applies to when you're taking a look at turnover and retention, you already kind of hit a couple of those specific points, which is that there are costs of waiting for that production to be completed, basically waiting for that person to be replaced. There is always a run-up time. Turnover costs include a wide variety of factors, but if you're really trying to sum up the cost of turnover versus retention, one, you're going to need to get all of your different costs of turnover, which is going to include things like lost revenue, the cost of hiring basically recruiting costs of the new individual, orientation and training costs. You lose training costs when you lose an employee that has taken training. There are HR separation costs, absence and leaves costs, overtime costs due to that vacancy, and basically the only thing that you're getting back is you're not paying salary while that person is gone, but that is usually dwarfed by the lost benefits of having that person gone. So that covers some of the costs of the turnover itself. But then, as I already mentioned, you also, if you really want to get comprehensive, also need to include the cost of compensation differential. So basically how much you're paying in salary for the new employee versus the old, because typically when you lose a valuable employee and you have to replace them, you end up paying more every year. So it's not just a one-time cost. It actually ends up being a continuous yearly cost that builds up over time as you replace your long-term employees with new employees that you have to buy from the market.
That's helpful. Thank you, Stephen. We have a little bit more time. I want to make sure we end before 1, and I want Trisha to talk about next steps. Let me just take the second question with a follow-up and just sort of frame this for Nicole and Siobhan. Nicole, obviously, your headquarters are now in Virginia. They were in California, which has a paid family leave policy. Siobhan, you are in Massachusetts, which has a new family leave policy as well. Talk about the impact of state law changes in terms of either motivating the companies to take this action and what it sort of does in terms of normalizing costs or minimizing costs. Because in some sense, yes, if you're operating in a state that has no paid family leave policy and you're the outlier, it's costing you money, but that cost sort of is lessened a little bit once everyone in the state has to provide that same benefit. Siobhan, let me start with you all, since Massachusetts has that recently has enacted the law.
Right. For us, the most significant change really was trying to understand how we would handle family leave across the various stages of life, because now for a company our size, a lot of these policies that have been at a federal level have been for 50 employees or over. So we've kind of had to kind of think deeply about being able to offer everything to everybody, but now we do. And the parental leave one, I feel like we've always had it. There's been some alignment to make sure that what we used to term maternity and paternity leave a number of years ago, they were given at different levels. Now they have to be given at the same level to all people, to all employees within our company. And when we talked about it, we realized, yes, there's definitely going to be a financial impact, because when we look back over the span of time, we're a construction company, we do have more male employees than we do have female employees at the moment. And so we understand that the impact of that financially as we go forward is going to be greater. But again, it just comes back to our values. We kind of felt, well, it's about time. This feels right. This is something that we'll be able to absorb in the scheme of things for a company our size. You know, how many people will avail of this from year to year? In our history, not that many. For a company our size, again, and for a variety of people we have at different stages of life, we may have, you know, a family having a new birth in their families, maybe one every 2 years. So for us, it's definitely something that we feel that we can absorb, and we feel in line with the culture of today and in the culture of our company. It's something that we feel really good about being able to offer. And what we think a little bit more about is just in a community sense too, is that these policies have created a way for families to be able to take care of their children for maybe up to 6 months. And when you think about both a father and a mother, or both parents being able to take family leave off for companies now small and large, and if they can take 8 weeks to recover from the birth of their child, or taking a new child into their family, as well as being able to have the extended family leave to care for it for another 12 weeks. If both parents in a family can take, you know, 12 weeks each, and then 8 weeks, you know, for taking a child into your family, you're almost up at that 6-month mark where an infant will be able to stay at home with its parents. And for us, that just feels really good, and we're happy to be able to participate on that at any level, financial and values. It just makes sense.
Nicole?
Yeah, I think, you know, for us, so I think we've been supported to see the state impacts. I think because we, again, are a little larger, we have a presence in 36 states, and it certainly isn't, and there's not enough state action to, you know, really benefit our larger investment. That being said, what I can say, what I hear from my HR team, is the complication of dealing with the different states and the ways that they've done their laws differently, you know, can be complicated for us. So, I mean, ultimately, we'd rather there be just a national policy. So a suitable national policy that we wouldn't have to deal with lots of different state activities, because I think ultimately for us, it doesn't, the benefit of what's happening at the state level doesn't necessarily hit us as well, because we're just so spread out among many states that don't have a benefit. So that's kind of. But we've been one of the things that we've done on the state level has been really relied on a lot of partners. There's a lot of advocates in this space at the state level, and we try to, you know, support their efforts as much as we can. And you know, sometimes it's hard in states where we don't have a presence, but there's a ton of great work happening in this space.
Yeah, I would just add one thing to that as well, Chris. Just in terms of, in Massachusetts, there's now going to be an employer and an employee contribution into paid family leave. And up until this point, we have taken on the burden of all of the cost. And right now, it's in legislature right now in Massachusetts, really how this is going to get implemented. And they're kind of setting up this fund similar to kind of unemployment that would be tapped into by individuals, you know, I think by 2020. So we're still not 100% sure how that will impact us and how we will manage the administration of something like that. So there's still some unknowns really for us with the new laws in Massachusetts. I think for us, we'll probably take the simplest route that we can. I think maybe that we would end up paying the employee the benefit first, and then there's some sort of reimbursement mechanism that might come into play. Again, we've got a lot of unknowns, so there will be a lot of figuring out for me to have to do to understand it once they've kind of written a little bit more about how to.
Great. We are running near the end of our hour, and I am mindful of time. We have been, yeah, let's move to the last slide. Trisha, great. Well, first of all, let me thank our panel. Oh, yeah, there's a bunch of resources that are available, and we are going to make the recording of the webinar available for people. We have a number of resources here. I would encourage you to go to uspaidleave.org, where you can find a lot of this information. I'd also encourage you to go to the ASBC website, which is asbcouncil.org. I know many of you are already ASBC members, but if you're not, it's a wonderful organization, as I said, of 200,000 businesses around the world who are pushing for more sustainable environmental and labor practices, and obviously paid leave is part of this. As we mentioned, we are in the middle of a big data collection project along this lines, and we're excited to share with folks after we finish the project what we find, because as you've heard from the conversation here, we are fortunate to have companies who believe it's part of their social mission to provide worker-friendly policies, but we understand as well that many other companies need to see hard data about both the costs and benefits of paid leave, and we are committed to trying to provide that, and that is a joint effort of both ASBC and Panorama. So with that, let me just thank all of you for joining us today. Let me thank our panelists, Nicole, Siobhan, and Stephen. A recording of this webinar will be available on the uspaidleave.org website, and please stay tuned for additional webinars on worker policies that ASBC will be sponsoring. So thank you all again for being part of this important conversation.